Hello everybody, thank you ever so much for being here today and agreeing not only to be part of this facilitator session but taking part in the sessions over the next couple of weeks. We're really grateful for you to giving up your time to take part in these curriculum design conversations. So what we're going to do then in terms of the agenda for today, we're first of all within our introduction here, before going through the overview of the curriculum design conversations themselves, we'll have some discussion over some of the more detailed points before moving on to your role as a facilitator, and we'll ensure that you have a practical walkthrough so you know what to expect as you're part of these conversations over the next couple of weeks. So as I've said, we're really grateful for you taking part and signing up to facilitate these sessions for us, focusing on curriculum design. This is part of a series of conversations that we hope to have moving forward and builds on conversations that we had in the autumn term. From these conversations, we learned a huge amount about what it is that's going on in the system, and equally then how these conversations can best be facilitated to support colleagues with their work and with their thinking. So one of the things that we've done with this one is we've introduced some pre-materials. So we've got a video that we're going to send out with the invite to everybody that's really encouraging the idea of what curriculum design is all about, reminding colleagues in Wales about what it is that we're trying to do here in Wales to overcome some of the challenges that people are finding, and in terms of moving from an outcome-driven curriculum to a purpose-driven curriculum, it really starts to remind people about the changes that we're making and why they're so necessary, what it is that we're going to develop from them. So we're going to be sharing that prior to the session, and that might be something that you want to refer to when you're welcoming colleagues to your session. So from this, we're also hoping, as we go over these series of conversations, to continue to build a bank of case studies that can inform what it is that we're doing as a system, but also to be able to support what's going on at various levels across that system, and to provide some snapshots of what it is that's working well and support colleagues with that idea of what other schools are doing and to share that information in the system. The one thing that we've taken feedback on, and again we've shared this with the invites, is that we're going to ask colleagues to ensure that they realise that this session is designed to take part as part of a proactive conversation. So we've asked colleagues to ensure that their cameras are on, and this is to support you as facilitators to have that active input that you need. So this is designed as a session where somebody comes in and actively participates, and not one that comes in, sits and listens and then takes something away, but really takes part in those conversations so that what they take away is providing them with some real opportunities to talk, and that they feel that this is a real safe space to be able to focus on what it is that's working well and share that, so we can be really proactive across the system, but equally then to be honest about some of the challenges that we're all facing in our schools and settings, so that we can provide that support network for everybody as well. So one of the things that's worked well previously in conversations is the inclusion of a worry wall. And we're talking a little bit more about that a little bit later on. But one of the things that we found is that having a Jamboard somewhere for people to post their concerns means that it doesn't derail the conversations that you're having, and trying to maintain the positive contributions that people make. But we all know that we do have worries and we do have things that are challenging us in our schools, and it's important that we acknowledge those as well. And as we collect all of that information, it enables us to be able to proactively put things into the system that support people with ongoing reform. And again, we're going to come back to that a little bit later on, to the importance of note taking. But it's really important as you facilitate these conversations that you arrange with your co-facilitator who's going to be taking the notes at which part of the sessions, so that these notes enable us to gather that intelligence afterwards and have something to act on. So in terms of these conversations then, we have here an overview of what those conversations are going to entail. What we want to be able to do is to really establish how our colleagues in all of our schools and settings across Wales are being supported at the moment with this change from an outcome to a purpose-led curriculum, and how this is working across the entire continuum. And as we gather that information that's going to be really useful to us to be able to share back into the system, we really want to be able to support colleagues to think about the preparations that are being made around the mandatory elements of the curriculum, and ensure that colleagues are clear on these as well. And then as a result, then we were able to take and share case studies of what's working well, but really bring it back to those key principles of curriculum design, and also to think carefully about the evaluation of that process and the processes that are currently going on in our schools and settings. So rather than it being a series of things that's happening, we can really push in terms of why these things are working well, and as a result, really encourage colleagues to think about that evaluation process. So our first question then is around how are staff being supported in schools? The video that we have here is around 6 minutes long. We've tried to reduce the amount of time that people are watching the videos to make more time for those rich conversations. This video in particular has a range of head teachers across schools and settings, as well as Estin, talking about what they are finding at the moment that is currently working well, what colleagues are excited about, what is really helping us to develop our thinking, but also being honest about the challenges that we are all inevitably facing. But the fact that we are facing these things together helps us to really encourage people to think about what it is that's working well and how it's working well. So we've got a series of sub-questions here that might be useful for you to consider in how you facilitate this part of the conversation, just to get people talking, to think about the reasons why the things that they're doing are working well, the challenges that people are facing and why those things are challenging them. So there's a huge amount from the video stimulus, as well as I'm sure what colleagues will share about how people are responding to those challenges. And that's really useful part of these conversations, to create these networks of support, and equally then to think about what other support could be needed that we can gather intelligence on and put back into the system. So we really want practitioners to feel that this is a safe space for them to share what it is that's working well. And we've got some aspects of this video that emphasises that September is not a task and finish deadline, and to encourage that ongoing reflection cycle and design process as we go through. So that's the first question and the first conversation we want to focus on. So in order to provide a break from watching something and responding, we've got a different type of activity here where you can use the chat bar or you can use the Jamboard, whichever it is that you're most happy with as a facilitator, to get people to contribute. But really starting to get people thinking about what are the mandatory elements of Curriculum for Wales as we prepare for September. Asking colleagues to think about the preparations that they're making to ensure that the mandatory elements are considered in their curriculum design processes. So we'll share with you in a few minutes that what these things look like, but they will also be included in the slide pack for you to use. So we have a list of mandatory elements, as well as a document that is being provided as a sort of one-sider or a summary of the guidance. So really what we're looking for in these questions is to really consider their overall understanding of the mandatory elements, how they're finding staff are being supported, what's working well again, and what it is that they're finding helpful. Again, we want to consider what challenges people are facing in designing their curriculum and what other things would be helpful to them in overcoming those barriers. So what we have here then is the list of the mandatory elements. We don't want to test everybody, and again, we want people to feel as if they're in a safe space. It's not designed to be a test of ensuring everybody knows all the various parts of the framework, but actually, can we provide some confidence in the system that everyone has what they need to have as part of their design thinking? And equally considering, how do we get people to ensure that this is part of a wider design process and these elements don't just simply become a tick list? So we want colleagues to benefit from the resources that are being shared. So in the same way as these conversations aren't designed for people to just attend, but then also to carry on their conversations in their own networks, whether that be in their own schools, their clusters, or in their own settings, this document is also something that's intended to support them. So we have a link here to various aspects of the framework. It explains what the various parts of the framework is intended to do, but it's all hyperlinked. So actually it will take you to each and every one of these elements so that you are able to go directly to the part of the framework on Hub that you actually want. So hopefully this will be something that people can take away and use, and equally, as we said, where we will have links to the videos prior to watching for these sessions, there will also be a range of things that we can share with you to support thinking. Things, for example, like the Minister's briefing to head teachers the week before half term, with a series of videos that can be used in schools, as well as some takeaways for schools to be able to support their design thinking. And we can share those with colleagues to support that. So our final conversation, our question here, is considering the key principles that people are building their curriculum around. So rather than this being a series of things that we collect along the way, what key principles do we really think are important in our own schools and settings, so we can make those choices about what we choose around our curriculum design and how we evaluate this as we go along. So we're actually asking people to consider their process of evaluation and refinement here too. So in order to support that, the video that we have here is again no more than 6 minutes, and it's thinking about what we're learning as a system about the processes of curriculum design. So again, through a series of clips that we have from head teachers, from practitioners, from Eston, we are really demonstrating what's currently working well, and to reassure people that it's okay to stop and review and to actually think about what we're learning along the way, and to think about what it is that we will keep, but what it is that we're learning potentially that won't work in our context. And really important to maintain that focus on learning, on the progress that learners are making. How do we know learners are making progress? And actually it's okay to go forward and backwards. It's really considering what it means to move from an outcome to a purpose-led curriculum. What deep-seated learning are we planning for? And as a result, how do we know what pupils are making progress? And really that reassurance that it's okay to take it slowly. Again, the idea that this isn't a task and finish job for September. It will also be an ongoing process of refinement. So some sub-questions here that we've got to support that idea then is to think about what it is that's working well. And this might be on an individual basis for those people that are in the conversation. It might be within their schools. It might be within their clusters. What examples are working in terms of departments or areas of learning, for example, those things that are working well. And what people are finding that's particularly helpful, what is working on that school level, on that whole school or setting level, and then what strides are people making in their local networks and their clusters. So the idea being that there are a range of ways in which people can access this conversation and contribute and take part. But if we can get people to really think about the why these things are working well for them, it will be helping them to think about that evaluation process. So being able to share some of the other things that have been improved, and influenced their own thinking. So it'd be helpful for them to think as well about who it is that's actually helping to support their schools and settings, the stakeholders that we have that can influence our design thinking. So this question really is about thinking about all those different layers that support in those principles around curriculum. And again, thinking about that ongoing cycle of evaluation and refinement in order to ensure that we're really thinking carefully about the process as opposed to the product. So just to share with you then the dates that are available for the various sessions for this conversation starting next Tuesday and then running through towards the end of the month. So it's quite an intense period of discussion, and we've included there an opportunity for a breakfast and a twilight session so that people have a variety of times and it doesn't necessarily impact too much on the school day for them. And people have an opportunity in a whole range of times to suit them and they can participate. It's also worth flagging up at this point in terms of registration prior to half term. Registration was a little slow and we did get that pick up over half term, and then certainly over the last few days it's accelerated quite rapidly, and perhaps not surprisingly as people come back to school. But if there's anything that you can do individually to promote the sessions, there are tweets that are flying around on Twitter. If you can share under the hashtag Curriculum for Wales with regards to the dates and the links to the sign-ups, and also the ad work from Welsh Government Education as well, we'd be really grateful. So if you are on Twitter or a Facebook user or any other forms of social media, please feel free to share the link to the hub page for registration with your networks, and indeed in any discussions that you may have with schools over the next coming weeks as well, just to highlight that this is something that you're involved in and will be of interest to other colleagues across Wales in schools and settings as they work on their curriculum design. Okay, so we have a little background here in terms of the national networks. So these national network conversations, it's designed, it's kind of like the what and the why, and it's relatively self-explanatory there for those of you who've not been involved in the conversations in the autumn series, but apologies for those of you that have. but a little bit of background as to what the National Network is about and what it's for. And it's really building on the experiences that we had as part of the pioneer process, and learning that the learning that we took from that process of engaging with schools directly and having schools engage with each other as well, and to discuss aspects of business and providing a platform through which that concept can be replicated across all schools and settings in Wales. At a national level, it's really an important opportunity to discuss what's working, what the barriers are to reform, and the conversations themselves are designed and shaped by the experiences of schools and settings and intelligence that we gather from the system as to the things that are really facing you on a day-to-day basis. And of course, the outcomes of this is not just to inform our thinking in terms of how we deploy resources, but also how the middle tier respond and interact. And also then, of course, it's space for practitioners themselves to gain further insights. And we've had quite a lot of feedback from schools that participated in the autumn conversations that are positive in that regard, that they really welcomed the space to reflect and to share with colleagues from other parts of Wales. But the important point there is at the end as well. It does directly influence policy and practice. So we saw that through the pioneer process, where legislation was actually directly impacted from the input of schools. And in that process, the thinking and the development of Curriculum for Wales framework was directly influenced not only just the legislation, but a lot of the policy and the programme support that came through as well. So we're very much of the opinion that we should be engaging with practitioners and reflecting their needs in terms of how we deploy resources. So it's just some here now, some practical general pointers with regards to the national conversations. And it's really important as facilitators that you are clear and upfront as to what that conversation is about at the beginning. So we'll go into that in a little bit more detail in a minute, but it's really essential to frame the conversation well at the outset and to highlight to those taking part what they're really there to get from. So develop those expectations early up front. And as we said, we really expect cameras to be on, to be prepared to engage with messages that are sent out in advance, and also worth doing that at the outset of the session. So it's really a kind of introduction now to the role of the facilitators. And it's really about supporting the group to understand their role and to facilitate their thinking. And also that discussion, that sharing of reflections and experiences, which will help each other to develop their own thinking and then lead to further action in their schools and in their settings. But also the role of the facilitator is to keep the group moving as well. So through those discussions, do not worry about getting stuck on a particular sticking point. Try to keep that conversation flowing and ensure there is a breadth of coverage and, of course, effective questioning, as you are all aware is a key element to that. So building on what has already been talked about then, the why and the what of these conversations are really talking about unpacking about how we run these conversations and the role of the facilitator or the discussant. Now, as been previously mentioned, the whole emphasis of the conversations is to build on the pioneer network. So the reason why you're there as facilitators is that actually you're bringing your professional autonomy and ownership to this conversation. So being teachers, being in the thick of it, being your own understanding and your appreciation of how the curriculum is happening, and to help facilitate those conversations with other teachers. So having that professional ownership of the whole conversation and the hold of that whole network is vitally important for the profession in terms of moving forward, and having the professional ability to articulate to the thinking, the choices and the reasoning behind some of the choices that are being made around reform. So this isn't just an academic exercise. It's not intended as a government exercise. This is teachers discussing and working out implications and ways forward for their curriculum design now and in the future, and including that critical thinking which is needed. And you being the facilitators in here will have to provide some stimulus and some sort of discussion points coming into those elements. So the criticality aspect comes into it, not just taking everything at face value, but also not letting people just talk about what it is that they've been doing, but actually trying to pose that critical friend understanding from your perspective, as well as from that government perspective, about thinking about why certain things are working. Why is it working? Ask those questions. Why and how do we know that certain aspects are happening? And this in turn provides that critical nature. So these questions and probing some discussions actually supports inquiry. So get people thinking about why are they doing certain things in their schools? Why am I doing certain things in my practice? And then getting them to reflect on how they are developing their approaches in school while listening to colleagues in the room, and then support that inquiry process. The whole reflective nature, being able to pose the question, being able to understand why certain things are done, that's the inquiry nature that we're really trying to promote. So in these discussions, it's not intended to be show and tell. It's not intended to be coming up with solutions. It's not coming up with a shiny new product that is the promoter of a discussion of a classroom perspective or a particular school perspective, but encourage those taking part to think about, well, why am I doing these things? And am I doing these things right? Am I on the right track? How do I know whether I'm on the right track? And then also allows people then to take the time to take that the ability to actually identify personal steps that they need to undertake within their schools and their context. But really the big thing here as well is in brackets in terms of this way of working. I mean, we've highlighted really that this is a new way of working. It is about co-construction. It's about generating that critical inquiry and expertise across the country. It's about facilitation and about talking with others and having professional ownership of the whole education system. And that really sitting in the hands of practitioners is what these national network conversations are aiming to do. Because at the end of the day, all of this is enabling better learning experiences for our children. These things about co-construction, the equity and the discussion, whether you've got head teachers in the room, whether they've got a classroom teacher, the equity and discussion now needs to be facilitated and maintained by you in these conversations. So it's that ability of drawing conversations out, of drawing people out of what it is that they're saying, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But as we've mentioned before, this isn't about a passive aspect. It's not intended to be 20 cameras off and having a few hours to turn my mic off and just listen. We've asked for cameras to be on and for people to be active in these discussions, and for you to be able to draw out those individuals and their points of view for all of this work. And it's that professional contribution really that we're looking for, rather than that passive attendance, so to speak. So what does it look like? What does that conversation look like? Well, being teachers, you're probably already aware of how to facilitate that sort of climate within your classrooms. And it's just replicating those principles within the discussion slide there. And it's about using those good questioning techniques that we have. So asking open questions, focusing on thinking and choices rather than the actual solutions, rather than the actual product or activity that people have come to, and being fully aware as teachers, you want to get to that activity aspect. You want to go to the solution. It's naturally where as teachers we're quite often drawn to, but it's about holding back from that and actually trying to pinpoint aspects of the thinking behind the choices that's being made, asking people to rationalise those choices. So things like why, how do you know, what were other experiences in this? And this will change quite dramatically depending on who it is that you have in the room. If it is classroom teachers, well, how do they know what it is that their learners are thinking and saying about them? Parents, then discussions with parents, if it's head teachers, senior leaders as well. How do they know the experiences from other staff members other than themselves and other parts of their school community, their stakeholders? So it's trying to pinpoint what those open-ended questions and really try and throw them out. And we appreciate that this is absolutely something that is probably very common to you in the way in which you work that. But we're aware that, human nature is quite often we fall into those gaps of coming to solutions. We want to help problem. We want people to kind of help get to that right answer. But it is a case of avoiding lecturing and reading things to people. But the real big one here is, it's very easy for people to enjoy that chatting, but then it's filling the void. It's quite easy for us to join dots for people. And it's quite likely that you're going to see those dots quicker. You've been closer to the reading. You've done lots of the prep work on here. And you can almost see those things as a teacher. And you have those things that are in your head. You think that helping people and coming to a solution is particularly helpful. But really what you want is for them to be able to read the situations and join those dots themselves. But there's a void in joining the dots for people because they will learn more and have more to take away if they've really come to those conclusions themselves. So it's the bits then that's that's talking about how you bring those bits of the conversations together. So ask the questions that promote and prompts that thinking, that fosters a discussion rather than holding those gateway views. And now this is something quite unique here, because quite easily you could just be a gateway or a platform for other people's views. So it's fostering discussions and therefore letting go, and lots of people coming in with their thinking, their views, rather than one or two individuals being the gatekeeper for everybody's views. So it's about holding that line, and that way, that last bullet point is really important. Every so often summarise those discussions. Have I understood what it is that you've meant in that way? Summarise the discussions at different points by bringing people into the room and just checking that understanding, checking that that's what it is that they need. And those summaries in particular will be really helpful to the note taking as well. And I come back to that point that was earlier made, that the note taking is vital for feeding back into policy, for feeding back into research. And this is twofold, really. Practitioners being able to, as well as everyone else trying to get the feel of what's actually happening here, really being part of that conversation. So again, that effective questioning is those pedagogical skills that you already have in terms of drawing them out, what that effective questioning really looks like. So again, thinking about questioning is thinking about being agile in that moment and really supporting that deep thinking. And sometimes it can feel uncomfortable, and that's okay. And I think, we've all experienced in teaching those deadly silences that we quite often have. And you want to go in, you want to fill that silence, you want to give the answer, but having those silences in those groups is really important, and it's absolutely fine. It's time for thinking time. We're all busy people. We don't quite often have that time to just think through a problem. So don't be afraid to hold that space for thinking. And again, this is something that is quite unique with these conversations, is that these are certain things that we're providing, and we're providing that thinking time, those discussion points of letting people go away and think more about certain aspects, drawing people back in at certain times, and ask. I mean, if you get a few vocal individuals who have definitely got their own views, is it 100%? Again, trying to hold back everybody, just kind of giving their views, but how can you let people come into that conversation? How can you provide people with the space to come in and think about that and not taking over? And I said it's easy when the group knows what to expect, that supports them to encourage and engage in those conversations. So setting those parameters is really important. So encourage the group to be supportive of each other, to be active participants as well, as we said, and use that question and chat aspect, reminding people to draw on people with the expectation that cameras and microphones are on to take part. So it's just to reinforce then, it's not about providing an answer, it's not about providing the final solution. And I find this is quite counterintuitive, because the whole purpose of what it is that we're trying to do is we want to help and support people, but it's not about providing an explanation at this point. It's not about choices and firing explanations for them. It is about filling the space with questions that could really pose that thinking. And it can be quite tricky at times. I know I've fallen victim to this myself, that there's a silence and you want to fill that silence and you want to make sure that it's purposeful for people, but holding back those discussions and those points as well, and promoting people with their own points of view, is going to be really effective for people taking part. Now, having said that, there are opportunities and there may be times where you will have to give a view. You will have to come in and give a particular viewpoint on all this. And again, the slides are there to help you. But if someone raises a point that is clearly wrong, or that you can see that it's a wrong path, is going to be particularly unhelpful to them, what you can do then is offer a different perspective. Ask really what the evidence is to support that perspective. So rather than just saying, no, you're wrong, it's, well, what is the evidence for that? I mean, it's trying to promote thinking. Why have you come to that judgment? Why have you come to this call? If this person is clearly wrong and it's say it's come back to what it is your evidence to support this point. If you can ask then some further questions to follow up to gain some better understanding, then actually what it might do is generate some useful conversations around misconceptions that can then be addressed, and those things will come to the surface. But that gives you an opportunity then to draw into other participants to ask them, well, what do you think about that? Would that work in your context? Is that something you would consider? So really what you're doing is keeping that conversation going, and ensuring that everybody feels that they're engaged. If we do get practitioners pointing to a particular resource or package or solution, unpack why it is that they're using that. What are the principles behind that product or that solution? Why have they chosen it? And keep coming back to that question of why. Why have they chosen it? Why is it beneficial? What do other people think about it? Pose the questions that point to policy or conversation inputs to help their correction as well. There will be Welsh Government officials popping in and out of various points. If you do need some support, if you do need somebody to clarify a particular point for you, or to provide some information, or to point you in line with some resources, then what you can do is call on that person to come into the chat. Again, it's coming back to that point of keeping everybody engaged. It's not about telling them how to do it, because there is no finite answer, but it is about providing them with a space for their own agency. And feel free to move on, and don't let it waste time if you find that certain aspects are hampering a lot of the discussions, or having those aspects. Park it on the Jamboard as well. You have it there to support you, and we can certainly let those wider points be known elsewhere for some support. So just to clarify then, in terms of who is available on the day, there will be people from Welsh Government that are there. However, with multiple sessions running in parallel, you may not have somebody there at that particular point. So if you find that you do need some support for anything, then you can put a note in the chat. The chat bar will be monitored across the conversations, and you might put in there, one of the schools has raised a question about X, can you advise, or something, to one of the Welsh Government officials, and it may not be responded to there and then, but it will be picked up and responded to as part of that conversation. So as I said, that should enable you then to be able to park any difficult issues that you find. And in terms of the discussion, if they did have specific questions, for us to highlight our names in the chat bar, and somebody will come through and pick it up as soon as possible. So we have some pointers here in terms of some of the things that equally you might want to think about and doing in advance. So clearly we've got 3 points here about questioning, about delving deeper and ensuring balance, so that you are asking the right questions, those open-ended questions, and that they're keeping the conversations flowing while ensuring engagement for everybody in the virtual room. And that's kind of some of the gentle challenges really that we've talked about earlier, about that sort of critical thinking, that critical friend approach, and also getting that balance between that sort of friendly challenge and also supporting the participants to realise some of those solutions in their own minds. A bit about delving deeper there. Thinking about some of the more reflective questions. And again, those questioning points are really, really important. But what we're really hoping for is that balance. I think there's a point there that about, being online can be a little bit difficult. It can be a bit tougher, but it can also be quite uncomfortable in terms of, you feeling the need to fill the void, or there is no conversation going on. But I think if you set the frame of the question right, then it will be okay. So setting those expectations clearly up front, that directs and invites people into the conversation, that it piques their interest. If you're not getting that sort of engagement, then you may feel it's something to support the various flow in the conversations by being a little bit tougher and calling on people directly, and you can afford to be a little bit more direct with people to ensure there is a balance. And again, if you've got some notable voices in the room, don't be afraid to be proactive and bring some other people in so everybody gets their say, and being part of that supportive environment. So it's really important then to say about capturing these conversations. We can't stress that enough, really. It is important for us, and therefore the outputs of the conversation for the planning group, which I know a number of you are also involved in, and to review the output of these conversations and to some conclusions in terms of how it moves forward. And it's really, really important that we get these clear notes of the sessions. So you will need to work with your partner, your co-facilitator, to determine who's going to be taking the notes at which part of the session, and for those notes to be clearly readable and understandable by somebody who wasn't in the conversation with you. So things like keywords or overly abridged phrases sometimes are not that helpful to try and understand and capture what's actually being expressed. But another key aspect of why it is that this is so important is for an accurate record of attendance, and that's really quite critical as well, and not least that we have to provide data in terms of engagement, and that's part of it. But secondly, more importantly for the schools, in a number of instances, the record of attendance is what actually triggers their payment for attending. So there is a financial implication for participants that we need to ensure that we have accurate records as well. So again, working with your partner in that co-facilitation role, please make sure that you record the participants in the session and are able to capture that as part of the report. And you'll see there the third point on that particular slide notes that the template is provided in the pack, and we'll talk about the pack and what you'll get in advance in a few minutes. So it's just an opportunity to capture that from the template that's provided. So in terms of a practical walkthrough then, and the conversation about how this works. So in your facilitation pack, you will have a copy of the PowerPoint. It will be linked to the actual videos themselves that we've mentioned today, and there'll be the questions, and the templates for the questions will also be in the email, and we'll send that facilitation pack towards the end of this week. What's really important is that you have a run through of the day. It gives you an idea about what's happening. In the email that you will receive, we'll also attach the links for you to copy into the chat. So please watch out for the email and the calendar invites that you've got there. And when it comes through, it's likely to come through from either Sinead or James. And when you do get that calendar invite, can you please make sure that you click on the link to accept it? If you do have any reasons that you can't facilitate, then please let us know as soon as you possibly can. But we had a number of people last time have a few issues with their calendar invites and things because it hadn't been accepted or it hadn't come through. So please make sure that you do that for us. Any problems, any queries, any questions, then you can talk to us. But it's really important that you check in with your co-facilitator first. We'll send you an email telling you who your co-facilitator is. But if you can then just drop them an email, arrange to meet them. The feedback that we've had from those in the autumn term that took part in this said that conversation was really important, and the conversations went really smoothly as a result of the planning that they actually did together. So if when you go in there, if you can just make sure that you're in a few minutes early, check that everything's working correctly. We've been in a position where no matter how well you think your machines and your internet works, we have some issues in terms of the internet and various access points running differently in all schools. So please make sure that you get in there early and make sure that everything is working for you. Please, when you get in, take a note of the attendance at the start. As you're introducing people and getting to know them a little bit, please have one of you that's taking that note-taking element of there. You might find that you have some Welsh Government officials just sitting in with their cameras off as a silent observer. It's absolutely fine. That's for our own various sort of development, really. If there is anything that goes wrong and you can't fix it, pop a note in the chat or drop an email to the Welsh Government official that you've been given the contact for beforehand, and somebody will do their best to get there as soon as possible. Please keep an eye in terms of the chat bar or the worry wall that you're using to make sure you're bringing in those discussions. And one thing that's been particularly helpful to people is that when they're sharing the videos, they've actually put a copy of the link into the chat rather than playing them in live time, because some people's internet doesn't allow them to see it. It lags a little bit. So in terms of a running order then, as we said in the introduction, please introduce yourselves, explain the purpose of the national network and be really clear on that it is something that's intended to enable the profession to directly influence policy and really to generate new insights and new information into themselves, rather than this being something that people come in, take information away and go again. So really try to think about how you're going to ensure you set that tone of cameras on, how it works. You then have question 1, so you'll have your video input and a question. It's up to you then whether you choose. You get a feeling that people might need a break at that point, or they might want a quick comfort break after question 2. But we've then got a task and the feedback that we shared with you that's in the PowerPoint slides, and then question 3 then the video input again. So what we suggest is that anything less than 30 minutes for each part of the conversation is probably doing it a little bit of disservice. So use those prompts, those questions, those sub-questions to really keep that conversation going. So as we mentioned, we're going to reiterate again the real importance of ensuring that we've got accurate records as well as notes of your conversations. So please can you send through your clear notes to the email address here, curriculumforwales@gov.wales, as soon as possible, because as we said, that triggers the payment for those people that have arrived, as well as ensuring that we can act on that feedback and start to do that. Over the next couple of weeks, there will also be some optional 30-minute drop-in sessions that we'll invite you to. They are optional. You can feedback on the things that you think particularly well, or anything that you feel that we need to do to improve. We'll obviously have your feedback from your individual conversation, but if there is anything more higher level that you want to take part, then feel free to drop into that session, and we just want to check that everything's working okay for you. So it just leaves us really in terms of next steps. So you'll receive your facilitator's briefing pack later on this week. You will be told then who your co-facilitator is. So as we said, please check in with them. If there is any concern in terms of availability, then please let us know as soon as you possibly can, because it helps us then to be able to put everything in place so that they all run smoothly for those colleagues arriving. It just remains then for me to say again another huge thank you for taking part in all of these conversations and really supporting our Curriculum Design National Network conversations for the next couple of weeks. If you do have any concerns, any questions, then please do get in touch. But thank you ever so much for your time. We really appreciate you working with us.